This is Boston Red on the 8th of April 2014. Jerry Pippin and I had a discussion earlier today. We have titled this episode the Science Comprehension Thesis, and this is by Dan Kahan, a law professor at Yale University in April and May of 2013. He worked with co-hosts Ellen Peters, Erica Cantrell Dawson, and Paul Slovak. Nonetheless, they came up with this thesis, and we'll talk about it a little more in the minute, and then Jerry and I will talk about it from a little different standpoint, but basically it's about how people think what they think. First, we'll go to the all-important scores. The Yukon Huskies are the champions of the men's basketball part of the Final Four of March Madness, I guess we'll call it. The final score there was, and we talked about this on Sports Today, our new show, the prevailing wisdom was Kentucky would take this one. We felt, and evidently it came up correctly, that the Huskies of Connecticut would take it, and the final score was 60-54. Their use of their guards played out the day. The Huskies literally never looked back. In the first period, they led by 35-31, and in the second period, 23-25. A close game, but no cigar there. They were 7th and 8th seeds there. Mr. Shabazz Napier was the man that carried the day. He had 22 points and 6 rebounds and 3 assists. So it was his day. They, in a sense, they never trailed there. Aaron Harris, and that's of Kentucky. Missed a three-pointer, and basically that was Harrison's game there. We were looking to see if we could see the line scores here. Basically, 5, and anyway, they didn't give us the score that the line score we were looking for here in terms of Harrison and company, comparing the two, but Mr. Harrison evidently did not pay off. So this is what occasionally occurs. One of the things that we talked about betting these types of games, and of course you're in a risk situation, and actually to ever make any money, quote unquote, out of it, you cannot go with the proverbial favorite. That is known, and you have to bet in a risk situation, and those bettors that betted on the Huskies were in a good position. Now, if the over-under was involved, I don't know what the line is right now. I'll get this later. I spent some time preparing for our presentation, which incidentally was in the new magazine, Ezra Kainer Vox, VOX. But nonetheless, the scores to today, a few were postponed. The game in Cleveland with the Padres and the Brewers in Philly, rain got them. But the Orioles did play at Yankee Stadium. Yankees 4, Orioles 2. The Reds of Cincinnati played the Cardinals in St. Louis. Cardinals 5, Reds 3. The Angels beat the Astros in Houston 9-1. The White Sox were beaten by the Rockies in the Rockies 8-1. The Oakland Athletics beat the Twins in their home opener. Not a good sign for the Twins of Minnesota. The Texas Rangers were beaten in Fenway Park by the Red Sox, finally. And the Royals beat the Rays of Tampa Bay 4-2. So those are the scores in the National in Major League Baseball. I'm sorry, National and also the American leagues, naturally. Nonetheless, we roll on here, attempt to roll on, and get to the NBA. It's still going strong. And we'll see where the NBA is going today, and how the Knickerbockers are doing under Phil Jackson's management. He's not the coach, but he is, as they say, in the all-important management suite. Just a second here. We're going in the wrong direction here. We actually are going for scores, and we got the wrong thing popped up. But we will get the scores very, very shortly here, and move to our presentation. Hopefully we can get this done in some kind of coherent manner here. We solved our problem. There were no games in the NBA. It slipped me. One thing can happen. You can sometimes look silly in this business. But nonetheless, let's go back to this. So we won't spend a lot of time on Professor Kahn's work here, but we will look at it in a very cursory type, I guess, situation here. The science comprehensive theory and why people believe what they believe. They gave an example here, a product. There was a new skin cream, and in one result, the patients that used the cream, 230 of them got better from the rash. 75 were ended up in worse shape. Patients who did not use the cream, 107 got better without the cream, and 21 got worse. Now, the situation is here, it's a very tricky kind of question, because basically, and we'll give the answer here, the short cut it, being better at math didn't just fall to help the partisans converge on the right answer. It actually drove them far apart. Partisans with weak math backgrounds were 25 points likely to get the answer right when it fit their ideological partisans with strong math skills, their ideology. I'm sorry. Partisans with strong math skills were 45% likelier to get the right answer when it fit their ideology. This is what Jerry Pippin and I were talking about, the whole idea of ideology. I can recall studying political philosophy in undergraduate and graduate school, that at the time we were more focused on political philosophy. Political science left us at that time in the early 70s and went to the quantitative or statistical packs, the kind of information we get from Sabato and company. So thus some things are a little bit clouded here. Nonetheless, this is from VOX, incidentally, VOX. The skin rash experiment wasn't the first time that Professor Kahan had shown that partisanship has a way of short-circuiting intelligence. Well, yes, it can, and this is what Jerry and I were talking about. Another study tested people scientific literacy alongside their along their ideology, and then asked them about the risk posed by climate change. Well, I've talked to many people about climate change, and those that are predisposed to the right are skeptical of climate change, whereas people that are not on the right and in the center and on the left, so-called left in the U.S., very confusing term itself, are predisposed to believe the scientists. So in other words, the people are finding data that serves them. So if you get the Tea Party types, no matter what their education level, they can have PhDs or they could be high school dropouts, they will not believe in climate change. And what happens here is people like the Koch brothers that have a vested interest in convincing people there's no such thing as climate change spend millions of dollars to reinforce that in the minds of these people, and that is what happens there. Or they use the people in some faith communities, especially the right-wing evangelicals. Now that has been a little bit of a change. There are some evangelicals that are environmentalists, a little bit different situation. But if you look on the scale, you can tell, and a lot of people now are ashamed to tell you they don't believe in climate change with all the evidence is out there. And on Vox, they're using little index cards. And here it says individuals subconsciously resist factual information but threatens their defining values. Because what happens is when the values are stripped from these people, there is nothing left. But from being a poster for many, many years, I've noticed on the right, more so than on the left, that when an issue is stripped from them, they just sort of put it in the proverbial file cabinet, file it away, and move on. And Professor Kahan's research tells us, another one of these bullets here, index cards, we can't trust our own reasoning. How do we reason our way out of that? Well, part of the problem there is it's overriding and it's enforced. Now, in his study, he couldn't. They didn't have time to talk about that. The ice caps don't care if it's rational for us to worry about our friendships. So basically, now that political parties have been sorted by ideology, and he refers here to such things in another article as vaccines. That's another right talking point. The vaccines themselves are bad. They're causing autism and various other things. And they believe this in a very furious way, that it is a matter of life or death to them. But yet they really have no evidence to prove it. They just throw it out there, but that is their existence. And when they are given the evidence, and when the political, now this is more important than given the evidence by the scientific community, when they are given the evidence in the political arena, in other words, when a political party, the Republicans, abandoned the climate change issue as they are abandoning now the same-sex marriage issue in droves. The Supreme Court let stand a case today. So in other words, as you see these issues floating away, and we talk about, Jerry and I, with the situation involving John Jeb Bush in how his approach to immigration. And Jerry pointed out that it was nothing new with him. But the important thing to take away there is, if he does pursue this nomination in earnest, that moves that issue front and center in the Republican Party, and whomever wins the nomination will take that particular issue out there. And Bush has a strong network, will have the money. In his other programs about like little Paulie Ryan, very conservative, and Paulie Ryan is saying, well, we got to get a budget out there, and that for another day. But basically the Republicans in Congress is going on a recess till the 28th of April. They won't be back almost to May Day. So in other words, they'll be gone, and we won't see them. And looking at their calendar, basically they have 55, I believe, legislative days left until the 2014 election. Not very many. They'll be into so-called constituent services. So now we understand what is happening in terms of vaccines, because these people strongly believe this. And this is one thing you have to understand. It doesn't matter if it's rational or irrational, whether science has a truckload of literature. These people believe what they believe, period. Another point here is, the point of doing studies like this is to show how to fix the problem. Well, fixing the problem is easier said than done. The only way that you can fix, quote unquote, the problem is that you fix the political, the body politic. And by doing that, you have to have elections. But just to elect a President Obama is correct about this, you need several Presidents Obamas. And that's to cut away the brush so we can start to see the forest for the trees. And that takes many times, many years now. With the same-sex marriage thing, we've seen acceleration happening there. Obamacare is getting better coverage now, and as it gets better coverage and more people enroll in it, it will make it much harder for the Republicans to use it as a flash issue. And perhaps in the next 3 months, we'll have to wait and see how the polling starts to go. That issue may not be the dominant issue in 2014. It's one of the issues, because as far as the number of people unemployed or redundant, that is an issue that is changing by the day. The closer we get to the mythical 6.5% or 6%, the less they can talk about it. Then they can talk about, quote-unquote, the real numbers, but that's very hard to talk about, because if we go back to G.W. Bush in his beginning, you get closer to, quote-unquote, what the real numbers were in 2001, 2000, and they are today in 2014. This is just a cursory example of this. We'll have more on this theory as we move along, but it's very important to understand how these values are cemented in Washington. As long as you have the Cantabana team there, they're cemented around these values. As those people leave and the political landscape changes, many of these so-called belief systems, they will not go away. But they'll be back to, like the Birches and some others, they'll be in their own little blogs and what have you, and that's where those people will be. This is Boston Red on the 8th day of April 2014. On to our discussion with Jerry Pippin. I'm talking with Jerry Pippin. Over the weekend, Jerry, Jeb Bush, John Bush, the youngest son of the president, George Herbert H. Walker Bush, is contemplating running for president. He was at his father's library in College Station, Texas A&M University, and a Fox News type was hosting an interview there. And on the subject of immigration, he said basically people that immigrate to this country do it out of love for their family, particularly their children. And that there should be more compassionate legislation on the subject of immigration. It should be taken out of the vicious party politics that is polarizing, etc. And he admitted that his particular words did not play very well with the right wing of his party, which is his whole party. But yet he said that, and he's being taunted as a replacement for one Two-Ton Christie, the governor of New Jersey, whose trusted lifelong friend, Mr. Weinstein, is now talking to the federal prosecutor in Newark, New Jersey. So Two-Ton, as they say, may have other problems and won't have time to run in 2016. Bush, however, has an extensive network based upon his older brother, G.W. Bush, number 43, 44, whatever the hell he was. Anyway, nonetheless, he'll have the money, he'll have the statute, and if he decides to run, where does that leave the rest of the Republican candidates and the Republican Party in general?
Well, you know, I said on this program before that I think the country and the Republican Party figures they've had enough of Bush. However, the Bush family. However, Jeb has been well known for his stance on immigration, and the facts that you read in this statement, that what he said has been his creed for some time, and he's not going to change that, and he shouldn't. So with that, he may be able to overcome the obstacles of being part of the Bush family and the failures that the other two had. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, they weren't completely failures. Well, I'm calling them failures only because, A, Papa Bush only got to serve one term, and the son did 2 terms, but it pretty well was, exposed that the Iraq War was a made-up deal. It was not really what it was. There were no weapons of mass destruction around. And basically, no one really felt that they would go this far, but they have, and they pretty well ruined foreign policy, in my opinion, when you're dealing with the Middle East and selling all of that intervention back home. I think, as I said, the American public probably has had enough of the Bush family. Now, Jeb Bush is quite likable and perhaps can overcome that with his likability. But I think, if they latch onto him, it would be like they did with Governor Christie, and something will come out amiss that we probably, would be better off not knowing if you are a Bush fan. And if you're not a Bush fan, you probably, gleefully can't wait till something breaks to put him back in the whole category as Governor Christie. I think it's pretty well agreed now that Governor Christie has pretty well had it and probably will not get the Republican nomination. And that Republican nomination this time around, some of the Republicans think that, we've had enough of President Obama and they can get back in the driver's seat. Well, in many ways, when you do what they've done to President Obama, 24/7 negativity on everything, even on programs that basically were Republican ideas, that Senator Obama turned President Obama, unveiled basically trying to appease the Republicans and get some support, and he never did. So hindsight, you look back, he'd be much better off probably going in another direction and actually embracing the single-payer system, which many in the Democratic Party wanted. Because there are some problems with Obamacare, and it's not really connected with the president or the structure of that. It's connected with the greed of insurance companies and the willingness to charge whatever they can in a short term and lay the blame off on a guy who actually gave them manna from heaven, so to speak. In other words, it's instant money-making time for insurance companies, thanks to Obamacare. And what did he get for it? He doesn't have much support from the Republicans, who normally have that constituency of insurance executives and investors. And I don't know. I think that Jeb Bush could come in out of left field, so to speak, and get the nomination, but it'd have to be a series of events. And I just don't see the Republican Party changing that much. They're locked into the ideology of the Tea Party, and even those that don't agree with it are afraid or don't think they can, and maybe they can't, oppose it and still be around for another day.
Well, that's an interesting note. If you recall, Willard Romney came in. He was not a favorite, obviously, of the Tea Party. He went to the right. But when you look at Jeb Bush in Florida, with the exception of being a bit progressive on immigration, he actually ran a pretty much reactionary government there in Florida. Not only that, he was the guy responsible for stealing the 2000 election from Albert Gore, Tennessee. So the Bush dynasty was kind of a dynasty based obviously on criminality. They stole the election, literally.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Bush is Mr. Liberal or anything. I mean, they that's the reason I say the party and the public and the nation's had enough of the Bush family. Well, it's kind of like what happened with the Kennedys. Only the Kennedys they never started the war falsely. They never did a lot of things that the Bush family's been involved in. And so I'm just saying, as you know, Boston Red, in politics, they can hang that petard around your neck, and you might not really have much to do with it. But he is a Bush. He can't hide from that fact. And normally, before the terms of George W. Bush, they would have, given the odds, talking about Las Vegas earlier in another show we were doing, they would have given you odds that the Bush family would be political gold. I'm just saying that they've screwed it up themselves.
Well, they're not political gold, no doubt about that. But 2016, a different year. You look at the other candidates, I'm not talking about Tutin Christie, we've already talked about him. But none of those candidates are silver. They're almost like in the bronze and beyond that, in the plastic coin almost there. I mean, if you look at the list of those...
corroded brass.
Yeah, you're right. Well, they have Rand Paul. He's pushing a libertarian agenda there. And then you have the other nutcases out there that we're not sure what they are pushing. Cruz has kind of disappeared from the radar. And then you have a couple of other nutcases out there and some recycle types that have ran before and aren't doing very well. They are on into Iowa, but they don't see much beyond those evangelicals in Iowa, and that's not going to carry the party. The wise men and wise women of the Republican Party, they're at the same juncture, but they have it rigged better this time. They were with Willard Romney. Now, they had a long primary. They're going to have a short primary this time. They're going to have their convention in June or July. So, in other words, they've shortened everything. They've rigged it up for a potential Bush type. Will they run a Bush? Who knows? But it's a possibility they could do that. But where does that leave the Tea Party? Well, the Tea Party are being dumped everywhere they can dump them. They're getting rid of those people. A lot of the Tea Party favorites in Congress there are just literally resigning, leaving, going elsewhere. And that's kind of the end of that. Let's get back to Obamacare very quickly. A poll out. We don't use this poll much, or this organization. I believe it's by Gallup, but it's interesting. Obamacare accomplished goal. U.S. uninsured dropped to 6-year low is what the headline here is. The percentage of Americans without health insurance dropped to its lowest in 6 years, due in part to Obamacare. And what it says is 5.6% of Americans lacked insurance in the first 3 months of 2014. That's down from 18% in 2013. That's according to Gallup Halfway Well-Being Index. So something new there. African Americans and low-income Americans saw the most pronounced drop in the uninsured rate, with a decline of more than 3 percentage points. And this was a survey of 43,500 Americans between January and March, and has a margin of error of 1%. So I think, as you predicted correctly, Jerry, more positive things are coming out, and 7.1 million private insurers, people enrolled in the insurance companies, and an additional 3 million in Medicaid. So it's moving along.
Let me ask you something about that.
Okay.
Do you know on the tax penalties if you don't buy insurance?
Right.
Do you know, is that money earmarked for some place, or does it go?
No, not as far as I guess it goes to the general fund. I honestly don't know, Jerry. I'll check on it and get back with you on that.
I would think that if they decided to take that tax money and then the fines, so to speak, you have to pay for it. If you don't have insurance, you get penalized. I would think they'd be much better off putting that into some sort of insurance fund for these people to go ahead and be covered. Otherwise, I can see a problem down the line where if the Republicans get off of some of the other things they're...
Keim is the chief of it. He's 29 years old. But one of the articles that appeared, we don't have time to read it here, but basically, the idea is that educated people that are well educated, quote unquote, with my word, rational thinkers, etc., tend to judge events much more rationally, progressively, than people that are less educated. And that I've heard that many times before. And what this site basically wants to do, it's an analytical site. It uses graphics. It uses a kind of strange thing. Did you remember back we used to have the index cards? Well, this is a graphical index card they use, and a number of them into cards. No, a lot of the sites I see these days are using that. But this whole idea, and I can recall in school, I guess maybe grad school, in political science, they talked about it. Well, if you have a bunch of well-educated voters, do they make better choices than less educated voters? What's your take on this, Jerry?
I think that that thesis, that hypothesis of educated voters make better choices than uneducated, seems very practical and very logical. But in actuality, I've found that the masses, the working man and the working woman, especially before we got into this climate where we're not now paying attention to any news, but especially up until the present day, the masses have actually been right on. They've actually been able to figure out what's rotten in Denmark, so to speak, and they throw people out right and left if they could. And it just, at the same time, educated voters probably understand that you're going to have to pay something for health insurance in this country, even though many of the people I talk to think you shouldn't pay anything. Think it should be just, the right of being a citizen. And so, I mean, the practicality of that is probably not workable. But that's one of the problems they have with Obama, is all of a sudden they seem to have grasped on the idea that they were going to get low-cost insurance with almost nothing, and now it's a little higher than it should be, in my opinion, and sometimes. That $50, $75, $100 a month stuff is not being offered everywhere.
That's right.
And
it's according to zip codes, literally, in some states.
And
it's unfortunate.
That's one of the errors I saw working with the Republican model, is if you're depending on the insurance companies and the doctors to, say, well, that's too much money. That's not what they're going to say. They're going to say, I need more money. And they do, to a certain extent. Everybody needs more money. But that's one of the things about capitalism, is that money rules.
Well,
and
you're
absolutely
right about that.
Are we going to be a capitalist society, or are we going to be, as I talked about the other day, and which I think is happening, a sharing society? And I think that's happening with the younger generation.
I think that's correct. A couple of points I want to make, Jerry, is that thesis about the educated voting more correctly than the less educated. That's elitist, and I agree with you. Joe and Molly Lunchbox typically make better decisions, and also Karl Marx agreed with you. But what has happened now is, and I also agree with you there, it's been perverted by advertisement, and basically with President Obama, a lot of it on race, and they've been able to, as they say, fire up the troops using the Sarah Palin type people, and run a pickpocket program at best. Another example of that is, and you're more familiar with this than I am, Medicare Advantage. That's the program where you pay more, and it's handled by private insurers. And the president has been tinkering with it, and the Medicare Medicaid office will come out with some new rules on it. And that was G.W. Bush's program, but part of the problem, G.W. never paid for the government's part of that program and awarding it to the private insurers. but the seniors like it. And in some states, a majority of the seniors actually pay extra for the Medicare Advantage, Minnesota being one of those states. And at the same time, the latest figures is the enrollment in that particular program has went up 23%. Now, that program is not all that cheap. I forget what the actual cost it would cost you to get it. I'm assuming you have Medicare Part B, right?
Yeah, I have all of it.
Oh, you have Medicare Advantage.
Medicare A, Medicare B, and Medicare Part D, as in David.
No, okay. D, is that the Medicare Advantage, or is it B, or which one?
Well, Medicare Advantage
is one of those, I know.
Yeah, it's around, and they do things like sending people over to do your dishes and clean your house.
Okay.
Things like that, and
now, do you have that one also?
I've been in the Medicare Advantage program, but I don't know that it costs all that much. I
don't know. What does it cost? Because I know the government subsidizes. I'll have to find that out.
Yeah.
We used to know, but anyway, nonetheless, GW never paid for the program, and that's
right.
Administered by the private insurance companies. And guess who one of the biggest ones is? The people called United Healthcare. They are one of the biggest in the business. So what they did was, the insurance industry put up the big lobby to not make these corrections to Medicare Advantage, which would save the government money. But they want to keep things just as they are because they are making money off of that. And most people don't realize that. This is not Obamacare. It's a totally different program out there.
Well, much of the things that we've been impacted with have been programs set forward by the Bush administration in the last 8 years.
I agree with you. Including the $1 trillion wars that they put out there with their budget.
And that's a big argument I hear from people that think we ought to have free health care. And they got a good point. I can't argue with them because they say we could spend all this money for wars that weren't necessary. How about taking care of your population?
Well, they could have done that, but the problem is, Jerry, if they had free health care, more than likely it would be run by the government. Therefore, the insurance companies wouldn't make their billions of dollars. And $1 trillion went to the war. Most people don't quite understand that. The GIs didn't get very much of it. The people in Afghanistan didn't get very much. Now, the political leaders, they got suitcases full of $100 bills. Same thing in Iraq. And the companies involved there, the private contractors, whomever else, and I think there's $6 billion went missing from the Defense Department. They don't know where in the hell that went. So in other words, money just went everywhere. It was like a money tree. You could just grab it, put it in suitcases, and there was virtually no accounting.
I personally think that was on purpose, and
no doubt.
That's what's going to come back to haunt Jeb Bush. It wouldn't take much to run it against the Bush family.
Well, it wouldn't take that much to run against the Bush family, but people sometimes are fooled if you can put enough money in there. Here's a man 60 years old, looks to be a little bit rational, not talking too crazy. But at the same time, he has basically the same program as little Paulie Ryan does with his goofy budget there, would impact social programs. Bush would probably put a few more dollars in education. But, yeah, you have the same thing out there. But this character, Teuton, the abrasive character, Republicans were around him, including the Bushes, until they saw, he was Sorby-Amby. But the problem with Teuton to begin with, even if Teuton would have somehow got the nomination and had to run, against a Hillary Clinton, the monster loves to brawl and talk loud. So there have been two loud talkers, and I don't think Teuton would have done too well in a debate with her. Teuton would have came out there blasting and went out crying. That's basically what he's been doing lately. Now he's back talking tough again. He's the bully one day, and the next day he's the choir boy. Doesn't work out. Anyway, I'll let you have the last minute, and we literally are running out of time. I know. Incidentally, you have another show coming up here, in about an hour and a half, I guess it is?
Yeah.
What's going to be on tonight, Jerry?
It's heard at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock Eastern time. What's the subject tonight?
Well, we're going to deal tonight with UFO sightings and encounters in the United Kingdom, and basically talk about. There's been a lot of incidents there in which a lot of people are not aware of actual contact with beings from somewhere, whether they're interdimensional or they're wherever. So I think if people are not familiar and want to be a little skeptical about the UFO genre, they basically need to listen to the show, because we have three people from the United Kingdom, and they're going to be talking about how they were muzzled and threatened when they reveal certain things that have happened with the military. And most of it's been with the U.S. military stationed in England, mostly the Air Force. And we will be talking about that tonight.
Yeah, and that show will be archived, because we'll air this probably around 3 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So they can go to your site, jerrypippin.com, right, is where they'll find this show there. Okay, Jerry, we'll give you the last word, and we'll say goodbye to you.
Well, I think that basically the last word, we pretty well covered most of it, but I would like to say that when we talk about all of the issues that we touched on tonight with you, Boston Red, there's one thing that stands out, and that is that there are a certain group of people in political power in Washington, and I'm not talking about the Obama administration. I'm talking about the way the House is ran and the way government in general is ran, and all of the candidates coming up from the Republican Party. Now, the Democratic Party is not without sin, but, everything's relative. And if you start comparing facts against facts, you can't come away with any conclusion other than a certain group of politicians are willing to put ideology and their belief in the free market system well ahead of the goodwill and the taking care of the citizens of the United States. Now, that may be too strong of a statement for many of our listeners, but I firmly believe that with all my heart.
I agree with you, Jerry, and I would be remiss. You did also a special, which will be on your site, on the life and times of the late Mickey Rooney, who died at 93. That'll be also on your site.
That's right. We had some encounters, as you always say, with Mickey Rooney. He's an interesting fellow, and he's everything that you've heard all about the publicity. He's all of that and more. And deep down, despite all his failings, he was a great human being, really.
Very good. Thank you, Jerry, and good evening.
Good night.
Good night.